They called him worthless, threw stones, laughed, walked past him like he was nothing. But beneath those ragged clothes and tired eyes was a secret that would shake this entire village to its core. This village runs on secrets, power, and betrayal. But every storm has a starting point, and this one began long before anyone noticed. If this story already has you curious, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Stay with us. The truth is coming, and trust me, it will shock you. The village square was alive with the morning bustle, yet a tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Women peddled their wares, shouting prices over the noise of chickens squawking and carts rolling over uneven paths. Children darted between the stores, their laughter a fragile melody over the murmurs of gossip. But all of it seemed to pause when the beggar stepped into view. Every eye flicked toward him, every whisper pointed at him. "Look at him," a woman spat, shaking her head. "The boy they call worthless again, always sitting there like he owns nothing." A child tossed a handful of mud at the beggar's worn sandals, laughing as it splattered across his feet. The beggar did not flinch. He did not curse. He did not beg. He simply looked ahead with eyes that seemed to carry centuries of untold stories. "Why does he even exist here?" another villager muttered, shaking a finger at him. "We do not need him." No one knew that these streets had once heard his voice, that these very walls had respected his decisions, and that his hands had shaped the fate of the village. Once he had been the leader everyone relied upon, the man who settled disputes with wisdom and fairness. But the two families, the ones who now glared at each other across the square, had conspired against him. They poisoned the council with lies, twisted the law, and forced him from the village, leaving him to walk the world as a beggar, silent and unseen. Across the square, tension simmered. The families had been feuding for months. One controlled the northern market stalls, the other held influence over the village council. Every decision, every trade, every word passed between them like a spark waiting for kindling. Today, it seemed, the fire would ignite. "You dare bring your cart to the east side again, Odeon?" shouted a man with a scar running across his cheek. His voice carried over the crowd. "You know that territory belongs to my family." Odeon, tall and lean, with a face hardened by years of trade and confrontation, squared his shoulders. "The market is open to all. Do not act as if this is your kingdom. You have no right to claim it like a tyrant." "You are bold to speak like that to me in front of everyone," the scar-faced man growled. He turned his gaze to the village elders, as if to demand their silence in support of his power. "These people will tell you I am right." The beggar, seated at the edge of the square, leaned forward slightly. He listened, every word sharpening his awareness. The villagers did not see him as anyone with authority, yet he had observed every confrontation, every scheme, every lie for years. "Odeon, calm yourself," called an elder from the council, his voice steady but cautious. "There is no need for shouting. We will settle this fairly." "Fairly?" Odeon spat the word, his anger barely contained. "Fairly? They stole my father's land. My family has suffered while these snakes sit and smile." The crowd murmured. Some whispered support, others whispered doubts. But the beggar's gaze remained fixed on the two men, his lips tight, his hands resting in his lap. "Enough!" a woman shouted from a nearby stall. "This fighting will bring nothing but trouble." "You dare tell me enough?" the scar-faced man roared. "I will not be silenced." The argument escalated further, voices overlapping, accusations flying faster than anyone could keep up with. The villagers began to take sides. Some backed Odeon, some backed his rival. Children froze, unsure where to play. Adults shouted over one another, and the market became a chaotic battlefield of words. The beggar watched, silent. His mind traced every insult, every betrayal, every slight that had been whispered behind closed doors. The tension was building toward a moment that only he could define. A small boy tripped near the beggar, sending a basket of fruit scattering across the dusty ground. The boy began to cry, and the crowd's attention momentarily shifted.
"Watch where you step, child," one woman barked. Another laughed cruelly. Yet the beggar reached down and helped the boy, lifting him gently and brushing the dust from his torn shirt. The child looked up at him, eyes wide, as if recognizing something invisible that no one else did. "See," a villager whispered, "even the beggar thinks he's better than us. He dares to lift a child when he has nothing of his own." The beggar's eyes darkened slightly, not in anger, but in resolve. He had endured the whispers, the stones, the cruel laughter for too long. Years of silent observation had sharpened his understanding of the village, the families, and the fragile balance of power that these two men were so determined to disrupt. Meanwhile, Odion's rival, a broad man with hard eyes, pushed forward. "You think you can challenge me, Odion? I have more influence in this village than your weak family could ever hope to have." "Influence built on lies," Odion shot back. "Your father cheated, your mother deceived, and now you claim power? Do you think anyone believes your words?" The villagers gasped at the accusation. Some murmured in agreement, others shook their heads in disbelief. The market square seemed to shrink as tension coiled tighter around every villager present. The beggar shifted slightly in his seat, the movement almost imperceptible, yet it caught the attention of those closest to him. There was something in his eyes now, a calm authority, a depth of knowledge, a hint of the truth that no one dared to speak aloud. From across the square, the scar-faced man sneered. "And what of you, old fool?" he spat toward the beggar. "Do you think your silence gives you wisdom, or are you just waiting for someone to give you power you do not deserve?" The beggar did not answer. He did not flinch, but in that silence, a storm was gathering, a revelation that would leave the villagers questioning every belief, every judgment, every action they had taken. Whispers moved through the crowd. Who is he? Why does he sit there like a king among beggars? What secrets does he hold? And as the shouting escalated, the beggar's lips parted slightly, as if tasting the moment. The village had reached the edge of chaos, and only one voice could bring clarity, justice, and truth. The children froze, the adults leaned in, the two families glared at each other, and the market seemed to hold its breath. The beggar finally rose slightly from his seat, not with aggression, but with the weight of authority no one in the square could ignore. Soon, he seemed to say with his eyes alone, the truth will be heard, and the village will remember what it has lost. The market fell into tense silence. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying only the soft shuffle of the beggar's movement and the murmurs of shocked villagers. No one knew what would happen next, but all knew the moment they had laughed at him for so long was about to end.
Years before the beggar was mocked and spat upon, he had walked these streets as a man of respect, not silence. Once he had been the village chief, the voice of reason that settled disputes, the hand that guided trade, and the eyes that saw the truth hidden in whispered conversations. The villagers, the same ones who now pointed and sneered, had once bowed before him, seeking his wisdom. He had not been born into power, but he had earned it through fairness and courage. When families quarreled, he listened to both sides and found justice. When crops failed, he advised the elders on planting and harvesting, turning barren fields into gold. Children remembered him as the man who would stay late in the courtyard, teaching them stories of courage, integrity, and foresight. But not everyone celebrated his rise. Two powerful families, envious and greedy, had long resented his influence. The first, the family with the scar-faced man, sought control over the northern market stalls and the wealth that came with it. The second, a stout woman and her sons, coveted influence over the council, desiring to bend decisions to their advantage. Neither could tolerate a leader who could see through lies or defy their schemes. One night, in the flickering candlelight of the council hall, they plotted. "We cannot let him stay in power," whispered the scar-faced man, his eyes glinting with malice. "He knows too much. He sees everything we do. If we do not act, our families will be at his mercy forever." "Do you think the council will support you?" the stout woman asked. "He is well loved. His voice carries weight." "Then we twist it," the man said. "A word here, a rumor there. By morning the village will doubt him. By nightfall he will have nowhere to stand. And so they began their campaign. Lies were whispered into the ears of the elders. Rumors spread of false deals, accusations of favoritism, and imagined crimes. Every word carefully calculated to erode trust. The chief, once revered, began to notice glances filled with suspicion, hushed voices that fell silent as he entered a room. But he never retaliated, never raised his voice in anger. He only watched, silent as the net tightened around him. One morning, the council met in the largest hall of the village. The air was thick with tension. The chief, unaware of the full scope of the plot, addressed the council as he always had. "My friends, our village thrives because we listen, because we act fairly, because we remember the bonds that unite us. Let us not be swayed by fear or envy." "Is that so?" a voice interrupted, icy and sharp. It was the scar-faced man, stepping forward with a scroll in hand. "We have evidence that your leadership has caused harm. These accounts show losses, unfair distributions, and questionable decisions." The chief's brow furrowed. "I have acted with integrity. Every decision I have made has been for the welfare of the village. What proof do you bring that is not twisted to your own ends?" The council murmured. Some looked uneasy. Others glanced nervously at the two families. "Proof?" the woman with hard eyes snapped. "These documents speak for themselves. You have allowed trade to favor your friends, ignored certain families' needs, and now crops have failed in the north. How can we trust your judgment?" The chief stood tall, voice steady but firm. "I have advised fairly, I have judged justly, and I have served with honesty. If you doubt me, ask those who have worked with me. Ask the people, not your ambitions." But the council, poisoned by envy and fear, ignored him. A vote was taken under their influence, and the chief's authority was stripped. He was forced to leave the village that once depended on him, the place where he had given so much. He walked away silently, carrying nothing but the knowledge of the truth and a heart heavy with betrayal. The villagers whispered behind him, some puzzled, some satisfied. Children who had admired him stared in confusion as he disappeared down the dusty path, never to return in the role they had known. Years passed. The village changed, but not always for the better. The two families seized power, bending decisions, hoarding wealth, and keeping the villagers in a fragile tension of fear and resentment. They quarreled constantly, each vying for supremacy, each forgetting that their triumph came at a cost. The people were unhappy. The children learned cunning over courage, and the laughter in the streets turned brittle and hollow. And yet the former chief remained, not in the halls of power, not in the council's eyes, not in the streets of the village, but in silence. He observed, he remembered, he waited. Every insult thrown at the beggar, every stone cast, every laugh mocking him was stored in his memory, each detail meticulously recorded. He knew the family's weaknesses, their secrets, their lies. He knew the truth that no one else remembered or cared to see. Then came the day when the family's latest quarrel erupted in the market square. Odion and the scar-faced man shouted accusations, pointing fingers, insulting heritage, and threatening violence. The villagers murmured, divided in loyalties, unsure where to stand. "You dare claim my father's land?" Odion shouted, fists clenched. "Your family cheated, lied, and twisted the law for generations, and now you stand here pretending to be innocent? And you," the scar-faced man roared, stepping closer, "you call yourself a defender of justice? You have no authority, no wisdom left. You're a fool clinging to the past." The beggar shifted slightly, eyes narrowing. He had listened to every word, every subtle hint, every gesture betraying greed and fear. He remembered how each family conspired to remove him years ago. He remembered the council's silence, the villagers' whispers, the children's confusion. A small boy tripped over a basket near the beggar, sending fruit rolling across the dirt. The crowd's attention briefly shifted.
The beggar bent down, helping the child to his feet, brushing the dust off his torn shirt. "Careful, little one," he said softly, though no one heard the voice beyond the child. The child looked at him with wide, questioning eyes, sensing a dignity no one else acknowledged. "See that?" a villager muttered. "Even now he acts as if he has power. He dares to lift a child when he has nothing of his own." The beggar remained silent, yet in that silence a storm gathered. He had waited years, observed every flaw, every lie, every act of cruelty. The village was unraveling, and it was time. He would speak, and the truth would strike harder than any stone. Odion's rival sneered, pointing at him. "And what about you, old fool? Do you think your silence gives you wisdom, or are you just a shadow hiding behind years of nothing?" The beggar did not respond, but the crowd felt it. A shift, subtle yet undeniable. Something was about to happen, something that would change the balance of power and reveal secrets buried for years. The village, caught in the chaos of its own making, was about to learn a truth it could no longer ignore. The whispers spread like wildfire. Who is he really? Why has he returned? What secret does he hold that even the elders fear? The market fell into tense anticipation, the wind stilling, the villagers' attention narrowing on the silent figure who had once been their leader. And as the arguing families prepared for another clash, the beggar leaned forward slightly, his lips parting, eyes steady. Soon the truth will be heard, and the village will remember what it has lost. No one dared interrupt the moment. No one dared look away. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The beggar, once laughed at, now carried the weight of justice, knowledge, and authority. And the villagers, oblivious to what was coming, were about to witness the return of the man they had wronged. The village square had never felt so tense. The shouting of the two families had risen to a roar, blending with the murmur of the villagers, the clatter of carts, and the distant cry of chickens. Odion's fists were clenched, his face red with rage. Across from him, the scar-faced man spat words sharp as daggers. Each insult carried years of greed and ambition, sharpened by envy and lies. The beggar remained seated, yet every muscle in his body was alert. He had watched this unfold for years, each fight, each betrayal, each injustice stored in his memory. The villagers did not see the depth behind his silence, the understanding that went beyond anyone in the square. He knew the family's weaknesses, their secrets, their lies. He knew exactly how to unravel them. "Your words are empty, Odion," the scar-faced man sneered. "You threaten what belongs to my family. Do you think you can undo generations of control?" Odion stepped closer, eyes flashing. "I will undo your lies if I must. You cheat, you manipulate, and destroy everything in your path. And you call me the intruder?" The villagers shifted uneasily. Some whispered support. Others glanced at the beggar, sensing the tension emanating from him. Children hid behind their mothers, afraid of the loud voices, the anger that made the market feel smaller, oppressive. The beggar finally rose slowly, his body straightening, hands folded. His voice had not yet sounded, yet the square seemed to lean toward him, waiting. A woman selling vegetables muttered, "He's just a beggar. What can he do?"
But as she spoke, a ripple of doubt passed through her eyes. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet authority, a knowledge that could not be mocked. Odion's rival slammed a fist on his stall. "Do you think your silence gives you wisdom?" he backed toward the beggar. "Or are you just a shadow hiding behind years of nothing?" The beggar's eyes flicked to the children, then to the elders, then back to the quarreling men. In that brief glance, he catalogued every lie, every whisper, every betrayal, every weakness. Every insult they have thrown at him for years seemed now trivial against the magnitude of the moment he had waited for. A young girl, no more than 10, stepped forward timidly. "Please, stop fighting," she whispered, clutching a basket of fruit. It's frightening." The beggar bent down slightly and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do not fear," he said softly. His words were barely heard beyond the girl, yet they carried weight. She looked up at him, eyes wide, and felt the same reassurance that countless villagers had once felt in his leadership. The scar-faced man noticed the gesture. "Even now he dares to act superior," he shouted, pointing a finger. "He lifts children when he has nothing of his own. What kind of man does that?" Odeon laughed bitterly. "It's easy to speak to children. It is harder to speak truth to those who wield power unjustly." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some villagers began to remember the history of the beggar's eyes. Something was shifting. Fear, respect, anticipation, all mixed in a silent acknowledgement. This man had a story they did not know. The beggar finally spoke. His voice was calm, low, but it carried through the square as if he was speaking directly into the ears and hearts of every villager present. "Enough," he said. The square froze instantly. Conversation ceased. Children stopped their cries. Even the wind seemed to pause. Enough of the lies. Enough of the fighting. Enough of the cruelty. The two families turned sharply, eyes wide, as if they had been slapped by the very weight of his words. "You speak," Odeon's rival spat. "But what right do you have? You have been nothing here for years." "I have been watching," the beggar replied, voice steady, eyes glinting with unspoken truth. "I have seen your greed, your lies, your betrayal, and I have remembered every detail. I have seen how you stole, cheated, and manipulated, and I have waited." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Villagers leaned forward, whispering in disbelief. "Who is he?" they murmured. "What does he know?" Odeon's face darkened. "You think you can intimidate us with words?" he shouted. "We hold power. We decide what is right in this village." The beggar smiled faintly. "You hold what you have stolen, not what is rightfully yours. And today the truth will be heard." He stepped closer, revealing more of himself, the posture of authority, the confidence of a man who once led and whose wisdom had shaped the village. The villagers were beginning to see the outlines of the man they had wronged, the shadow that had quietly observed for years, waiting for the moment of reckoning. A woman from the council stepped forward, voice trembling. "It cannot be. Could it be you were—" "Yes," the beggar said simply. "I was your leader. I served you with fairness and integrity, and you cast me out with lies, believing my silence would last forever." The murmurs escalated. Some villagers gasped, some whispered apologies, and a few looked away in shame. The scar-faced man and Odeon froze, realizing the depth of the betrayal not only they had orchestrated, but that they had thought forgotten. The beggar raised his hand, silencing the square instantly. "Do you see now?" he said. "Do you understand the cost of your envy and greed? You have fought for power while ignoring justice. You have humiliated the innocent while elevating the undeserving." Odeon swallowed hard. You were our chief all these years?" "Yes," the beggar said, "and every insult you threw at me, every stone, every cruel word, you will now see the weight of truth." A hush fell. The villagers stared at him, some with fear, some with awe, all with the realization that the beggar they had mocked was the very man who had once guided and protected them. The market square, once chaotic, now trembled with anticipation. The beggar stepped fully into the center of the square, the market noise fading into silence as all eyes turned toward him. His tattered clothes belied the authority in his posture, the years of observation and experience etched into every line of his face. "You have laughed at me for years," he began, voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "You have thrown stones, insults, and ridicule. You have mocked what you could not understand, and now the truth cannot be hidden any longer." The scar-faced man stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "What truth? You have nothing. You are nothing. Do you think words can undo what we have built?" Odeon's voice shook with a mix of fear and anger. "Do you think the village will listen to a beggar, that we will bow to him?" The beggar's eyes glinted. Nothing? You see the clothes, the dust, the silence, but I see everything you have done. Every lie, every secret theft, every act of betrayal. You thought the village would forget, but the village remembers, and so do I. He paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd held its breath. Even the wind seemed to still. You took what was not yours. You cheated in trade, manipulated the council, humiliated the innocent, and you believed your power was unchallenged. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and it always finds the ears of those who will listen. A woman whispered behind him, barely audible. Could it be true? Was he really our chief? Yes, the beggar said, voice soft but firm. I was your chief. And every insult you hurl at me, every stone, every cruel word, you will now see the weight of truth. He turned toward the scar-faced man. You, who claimed the northern market as your own, sold goods at inflated prices, stole crops and cheated traders, you will return what was taken. You will admit your lies. The man's face drained of color. Silence! The beggar snapped. You, Odeon, who allowed envy to poison your family, who spread false accusations to gain influence, you will confess to your sins and restore balance. Odeon's jaw tightened. You cannot make us. We are strong. We are powerful. The beggar smiled faintly, almost sorrowfully. Power built on lies is fragile, and the village remembers what is right. The villagers began to murmur, gaining courage. It's true, an elder said, stepping forward. He was our chief. He guided us fairly. We cannot ignore the truth. A group of children nodded, their eyes wide. We remember, one said. We helped us learn and play and kept the village safe. The two families faltered, realizing that the mockery and power they had relied on were crumbling under the weight of truth. The beggar's calm authority spread through the crowd, giving voice to the doubts, fears, and memories of all who had been silenced or ignored. You see now, the beggar said, lifting his hand, the village does not belong to the greedy or the deceitful. It belongs to justice, to truth, and to those who act with integrity. Your time of unchecked dominance is over. Odeon's rival, trembling, finally spoke. If what you say is true, if the village remembers, then what becomes of us? You will make amends, the beggar replied. You will restore what was stolen, apologize to those wronged, and accept the guidance of the village once more. Only then can peace return. The villagers began to cheer softly, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. He speaks the truth, one shouted. The beggar, he is right. The two families glared at each other, realizing they could no longer maintain the facade of power. They were forced to concede, unable to argue against the weight of collective memory and the calm authority of the beggar. The beggar looked across the square, eyes softening as he took in the crowd. Children, elders, traders, and families all were watching, learning the lesson of patience, justice, and humility. You see, he said, lifting his hand, mockery and cruelty may silence one voice, but they cannot erase truth. They cannot erase the memory of justice, and those who act with integrity will always return, even when the world casts them aside. A woman stepped forward, tears in her eyes. We were wrong, she said softly. We judged you too quickly. Forgive us for doubting, for mocking, for throwing stones. The beggar smiled faintly, almost kindly. The village is learning, he said. Let this be a lesson for all generations to come. Respect the humble, listen to the silent, and never forget the value of truth. The scar-faced man and Odeon hung their heads, shame and understanding washing over them. The crowd cheered now, louder, a chorus of relief, acknowledgement, and restored faith. The beggar slowly turned toward the edge of the square, his work complete, not with arrogance, but with the quiet authority that had always defined him. Children ran after him, eager to see the man who had been wronged but had returned stronger, wiser, and just. As he walked toward the rising sun, his voice carried softly. Remember this day. Remember the cost of greed and envy, and remember that even the quietest voice, the most overlooked soul, can bring justice when the time is right. The villagers watched, their hearts swelling with awe, respect, and a touch of fear. They had laughed, they had mocked, they had dismissed, and now they remembered the man who had led them, the man they had wronged, the man who had returned not for revenge, but for truth.
The village had been transformed, not by wealth, power, or fear, but by the voice of the one they had mocked, the one they had ignored, the one who finally spoke. And from that day on, no one ever doubted the power of truth again. The village square, once filled with chaos, now breathed a collective sigh of relief. The two families stood humbled, their power diminished, their lies exposed, their envy laid bare. The villagers, eyes wide and hearts pounding, began to murmur quietly among themselves, acknowledging the justice they had long ignored. The beggar sat once again at the edge of the square, though no longer merely a shadow of shame. His posture, calm and assured, radiated authority and wisdom. Children approached him slowly, holding out small offerings of fruit or flowers, their eyes shining with awe and newfound respect. The elders nodded solemnly, recognizing the truth they had failed to see years ago. Odion stepped forward, voice low, carrying both shame and sincerity. "We were wrong," he admitted. "We allowed greed and pride to cloud our judgment. You have reminded us what it means to lead with honesty and courage." The scar-faced man, too, bowed his head. "I have failed this village, and I will seek to restore what I have taken. Teach us, that we may do right by all." The beggar's lips curved into a small, forgiving smile. "It is not vengeance I seek," he said softly, "but awareness. Let this be a lesson that truth cannot be silenced, humility cannot be ignored, and justice, though delayed, will always find its way." The villagers gathered closer, sensing the depth of his words. Mothers held their children a little tighter, merchants straightened their stalls, and the youth felt a spark of hope stir in their hearts. The laughter that returned was different this time, lighter, warmer, and free of cruelty. The market, once a battlefield of insults and envy, transformed into a place of cautious celebration. And yet, the beggar remained a reminder that wisdom often comes from those we least expect. He had been overlooked, mocked, and abandoned, but his voice, when raised, carried more power than any title or wealth ever could. As the sun dipped towards the horizon, casting golden light across the village, he rose once more, his shadow stretching long over the square. "Remember," he said, voice firm but gentle, "the measure of a community is not in the power of the few, but in the integrity of all. Guard your hearts, seek the truth, and never forget those you dismiss." The villagers watched in silence, absorbing the weight of his words. They had learned humility, respect, and the cost of their arrogance. And though the beggar returned to his place at the village entrance, he was no longer invisible. In their eyes, he was a figure of wisdom, courage, and justice. Before we end this story, take a moment to like this video if you felt the weight of the beggar's words. Comment below what lesson struck you the most, and subscribe so you won't miss stories that challenge your heart, your mind, and your perspective. The village had been transformed, not by wealth, power, or fear, but by the voice of the one they had mocked, the one they had ignored, the one who finally spoke. And from that day on, no one ever doubted the power of truth again.